Welcome back to Open Line tonight. Just writing down our first caller. We're going to get to Bob here in just a second. Bob, thank you for being with us. I want to let everyone know who's just tuning in here on the half hour that we're talking about vaping, particularly with teens, but just vaping in general as well, and also the coronavirus. We have a panel here to talk about that. Bob, what's your question tonight?
There's a video that's been floating around showing that Lysol kills the COVID-19 virus bug, or whatever you want to call it. And I wanted to find out how true that is, and if Lysol is capable of doing that, then we've known about this bug for a long time. And I was just curious as to what your feelings are on that.
You know, I've seen a lot of people talk about this on social media, turning around that Lysol, their Clorox wipes, and say it works on coronavirus. Can you talk about what the coronavirus is? That's been around for a while.
Well, the coronavirus is one of the many respiratory viruses out there, and there are different strains of the coronavirus. There are 4 strains that we commonly see that cause cold-like symptoms.
For a long, I mean, not just this year.
Yes, that have nothing to do with what you're hearing about coming out of China and Korea and other places. In addition to that, there were 2 other very deadly strains of coronavirus that came out in the last 10 or so years. There was Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, or MERS, and there was SARS, the Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome virus. Both of those were coronaviruses. Both made brief appearances on the world scene and then disappeared, or sort of faded into the background. And this is another coronavirus. It's a respiratory virus. It's spread, we believe, mostly by droplet, meaning that people cough it up and the droplets sort of land on surfaces. They land on your hands. People touch the surfaces or shake hands with someone and then rub their nose or their face, and they introduce it. There's a possibility that it could be an airborne, there could be some airborne component, but that seems less likely. And airborne meaning that it's just in the air and we're inhaling it. That happens with things like measles. Doesn't happen, we don't think it happens with most coronaviruses. And so that's how people are getting it. As far as Lysol, certainly disinfectants on surfaces work. Whether that particular product, I can't really comment on that, but cleaning surfaces, washing hands is a good way to try to combat the spread of the virus.
Right. So I think, you know, to answer Bob's question, when it says, you know, kills the coronavirus, it's talking about many of these that have been around for a long time, not specifically the strain that we're seeing out of Wuhan, China, that's now worldwide now. 6 deaths in Seattle. You know, we keep bringing the stories from hearing people in the U.S. saying, don't panic. But then again, new deaths every day. This is spreading. What is your message to patients and to people who are watching?
I think the don't panic is a good message. I compare this to what we know, the devil we know, and the devil we know is the seasonal flu virus. Every year in this country, flu takes off, usually late October, early November, builds up slowly, peaks usually in January or February, and then tapers off. And over the typical flu season in the U.S., we will have 30 to 40 million Americans get the flu, and somewhere around 30 to 40,000 of those, which is 0.1%, about 1 out of every 1,000, dies of flu-related illness. And so that's a virus, a respiratory virus that we see all the time and that we understand. The coronavirus, COVID-19, coming out of China, appears to be more transmissible than seasonal flu. The typical seasonal flu, one person that has it will infect maybe 1.2, 1.3 other people, and there's sort of an exponential rise over several weeks. As best we can tell so far with the coronavirus coming out of China, that number may be 1 person infecting 2.5, 3.5 people. So it spreads more rapidly, which is consistent with what the Chinese are telling us, and that is that this virus has peaked in China and is now seems to be coming down. It's still on the rise everywhere else, but it seems to have peaked in China. And if it's peaked in China with 3,000 deaths so far, that's good news compared to, say, the seasonal flu that peaks in the U.S. every January or February with 20,000, 25,000 deaths on its way to 30 or 35,000 deaths. And China has 4 times the U.S. population. So proportionally, if it's true that it's peaked and it's on the decline, I would take that as good news. I would take that as meaning that a lot of people are being infected that aren't getting very sick that we don't know about. When we hear that there's a 2% mortality rate in China, or 0.7% mortality rate in Korea, or an 8% mortality rate in Iran, that's really dependent on who you test. If you only test people that are dying, of course you're going to have a high mortality rate. But if you have people that have the sniffles or don't have any symptoms at all that aren't being tested, then you don't really know what the true mortality rate is of the virus.
Even though we're hearing these messages of don't panic, but do smart things like wash your hands, stay home if you're sick, those sorts of things, are people coming into your offices, and I'll give you this to Dr. Feagins, saying, I'm sick. Do you think it's the coronavirus?
You know, it's funny because I have not had a lot of people come to my office with that. They're more concerned about whether or not they have the flu. You know, there hasn't been any cases in Tennessee, which is a good thing. So I think that, you know, if, and God forbid we do, we have some cases in Tennessee, we'll probably see more patients coming into doctors' offices asking that very question.
And this is an issue that you guys are tackling over at Father Ryan, just like vaping.
Absolutely. And one of the first things we did was we consulted with our medical advisory team. That was one of the reasons why we put this together back in October, November, is because we wanted to get information from the experts. And along with the guidance of our medical advisory team and following along with what the CDC is reporting, we have taken action. We met with our faculty. We have given out the sanitation wipes. Our maintenance department is putting out sanitizing the surfaces. We're asking anybody who is sick to please stay home. We kind of took the approach of what can you do as the faculty and staff, and then what can we do as an administrative team, and then what would we do if we were to have to close schools. So we are trying to look and make sure that we're ready in case something were to happen.
All right, let's get back to the phones. We have Jimmy waiting ever so patiently. Hi, Jimmy. What's your question tonight?
Yeah, the guy talking about in China where there's only been 3,000 deaths. You honestly believe China and their statistics? China lies all the time just to make themselves not look bad. If they say 3,000, it probably means closer to 30,000.
That is interesting. That's an interesting perspective. Thank you, Jimmy, for calling in. And we are very much at the mercy of their reporting.
We are, and that is a very valid question. We do have data, though, in other places. For example, on this cruise ship, there were more than 500 cases, and I believe there were only 2 deaths out of the 500 people. And I say only 2. I don't mean to minimize. It's a very significant deal for those families, and our hearts go out to them. But when we're worried about something that we think is going to kill millions of people, or worried that it might kill millions of people, it's reassuring that the case fatality rate was actually lower than we would have thought from even the numbers the Chinese published. In the U.S. so far, there have been 6 deaths out of 80-something cases identified. Those have all occurred in one area, and most of those have occurred in nursing home residents, very impaired patients. The typical seasonal flu is most dangerous for the very old and the very young, and we see a similar pattern there.
Usually when somebody's health is compromised by something else, this is going to make them more susceptible for this not to have a good outcome.
Exactly. Anytime you have an illness that takes a toll on you, if you're healthy to start with and you have a bad illness, you have more reserve. If you're fragile to start with, it's often enough to tip you over the edge, and I think that's what we're seeing in some of these nursing home patients in Washington State.
I've had a few of my friends talking on Facebook, oh, I have these conferences to fly to, I'm so nervous, what do I do? If you had patients call in and say, I'm going to be traveling, and considering every day we hear of new little pockets pop up, what's your advice to them? Especially on an airplane, you're just like a little germ factory.
That is a tough question. In fact, I was before coming in, I was watching Vice President Pence's news conference with Dr. Fauci and other medical experts there, and that question came up from a reporter, and they sort of artfully dodged the question. That right now there are no travel restrictions in the U.S. There are some travel restrictions to some of these other affected areas. A big question is spring break is coming up, and I'm getting the question, what do we do for spring break? And I'm not fearful right now from what I hear about the virus that you're going to travel somewhere and pick it up and die. That's not, but there is, this is something new, and it stands to reason that it creates a certain amount of apprehension. And my concern is traveling somewhere and then either having an outbreak in that community or an outbreak in Nashville while I'm gone and not being able to get back because some travel restriction goes into place. And I think that's, you know, how big of a risk is that? I don't know, but I think there is some risk that that could happen.
All right, on that note, we have to take another quick break. If you have a question about coronavirus or vaping, both of our topics tonight, we have one last chance to squeeze them in. So go ahead and give us a call during the break, 615-737+. Stay with us.